I have been seeing this shit all over Twitter for some reason. How people with Down syndrome were treated in history. It's interesting as hell. Actually, specifically, I saw Antonio Brown post this. Really, really random. But when I saw that, I was like, I gotta watch this. So let's check it out. How people with Down syndrome, or wait, how were people with Down syndrome treated in history?
In today's video, we will look at the history of people with Down syndrome, from how they were treated, to how eugenics sought to eliminate people with this condition. It should be noted that some of the language used in this video will no longer be acceptable, but it's important in understanding its history and how language and values have changed over time. Down syndrome, otherwise known as trisomy 21, is, simply put, the presence of a full or partial additional chromosome. Typically, a human will have 23 chromosome pairs, vital components of a cell to hold our DNA. In individuals with Down syndrome, the chromosome pair number 21 will have an extra chromosome, either a full or a fragment of one. This additional chromosome alters the blueprint in the development of the embryo, with too high a dose of certain genes leading to congenital conditions. The extra copy of chromosome 21 occurs due to the failure of the chromosomes to separate fully during the production of the sex cells. There is no direct cause for the cells splitting in this manner, though it has been noted that mothers over the age of 35 have a higher chance of having a child with Down syndrome.
I've always wondered just like how this even happens. Like, I guess it's just being unlucky with the chromosomes. You know what I mean? Where it's like shit just don't work out. I don't know. It's kind of interesting, but and it's kind of like, I don't know, bro. It's just being a person with Down syndrome is just so interesting to me. Like, I'm not trying to say nothing that'll get me canceled, obviously, but like, it's just a very interesting experience. Like, I wonder how they perceive the world. You know what I mean? Like, how does it look from their lens, if that makes sense? I don't know.
Down syndrome will result in several different clinical conditions, as it affects many parts of a person's systems. People with Down syndrome will often display intellectual and developmental disabilities, neurological features, congenital heart defects, gastrointestinal abnormalities, and characteristic facial features. And as many as 50% of babies born with Down syndrome are born with heart problems. This is tragically the leading cause of mortality in people with Down syndrome, especially in the first 2 years. As for the history of people with Down syndrome, with it being a genetic condition, they have been part of human history so long as there have been humans. But before the medicalization of the condition, Down syndrome was not recognized as its own disability. People with Down syndrome were often grouped together with people with other intellectual disabilities under the umbrella term of idiots from birth. Evidence from 5th and 6th century burial sites in France indicate that people with Down syndrome were buried with other members of the community. This could indicate that they were not stigmatized and were treated just like any other member of the community. Although people with intellectual disabilities like Down syndrome could not own land, nor could they inherit. So too are there examples of people with Down syndrome being abandoned and neglected, with families unwilling or unable to care for their complex needs.
Damn.
As people with Down syndrome often have many health problems, most died at a young age without their proper medical care.
See, that's crazy. I never even knew that, but then now that I'm starting to think about it, I've never, and I'm not even saying this to be insensitive, I don't think I've ever seen like an old person with Down syndrome. Like, if I'm really, really analyzing right now, I don't think I've ever seen an old person with Down syndrome. It's always people that are relatively young or like maybe middle-aged, but I don't really see it too commonly ever. And that's why I was like, I always wonder too, I'm like, damn, so is Down syndrome only a mental thing, or is it an overall whole physiological thing where like your whole body is just not, normal? I don't know. It's really interesting.
People who appear to have Down syndrome appear in a number of paintings or in sculptures throughout history, though much of this is modern-day interpretation of the facial features of those depicted. Those with the condition were often confined to the role of the eternal child or the holy innocent, and so in such paintings they were often depicted as angels or alongside Jesus Christ.
Okay, that's pretty cool.
Before the development of state-run institutions, responsibility for the care of disabled people fell on the family. However, there are examples of religious hospitals that cared for people with intellectual disabilities. Down syndrome was first described in 1866 by Dr. John Langdon Down, and of course it is from him where
Of course his name was Down. That's... wow.
syndrome gets its name. Down was a British doctor, and he worked in what was then called the Royal Earlswood Asylum for Idiots.
Bro,
this was a charitable asylum
Christ,
with
man.
patients admitted through recommendation. At a time when many people with intellectual disabilities or mental illness were simply locked away for indefinite periods of time, this asylum had different goals.
Locked away is
It
crazy.
catered for children of school age, whose families otherwise would not be able to afford institutional care. The goal was to teach the patients useful life skills and to prepare them for integration into the community. Whilst working as the superintendent for the Earlswood Asylum, Down began to categorize groups of his patients. He grouped the patients based on those with similar facial features and intellectual disabilities. But this categorization was done through the lens of racialized pseudoscience.
I'm not even trying to be funny though. I've never seen a person with Down syndrome with this style of beard. That's definitely an interesting look back in the day. I'll tell you that. Honestly, I don't even think I've really... Now, I've seen that beard in general. I think that's like some old president portraits or whatever. But that's a very interesting hairstyle, I'll be honest.
Down wrote his paper, Observations on an Ethnic Classification of Idiots, in which he put forward the theory
They really keep
that it was
throwing down the
possible
term
to
idiots.
classify different
Jesus,
conditions
bro.
by ethnic characteristics. Down classified people we would now consider with Down syndrome as the Mongolian idiot, or as Mongoloids, as he believed that they looked Mongolian. His classification of people
Asian,
with intellectual disabilities along racial lines was never accepted, and Down himself would later abandon his own beliefs. After leaving his position at Earlswood, Down set up his own private home for people with Down syndrome, called Normansfield. It was here where Down ran a facility with the highest standards of comfort and hygiene. The patients at Normansfield received an education as well as being able to enjoy leisure activities like horse riding, arts and crafts, and gardening. Down passed away in 1896, aged 67. His grandson, Norman, born a decade later, was diagnosed with Down syndrome. Down's work in identifying the characteristics of people with Down syndrome caught on by the turn of the 20th century. By this point, Down syndrome was referred to as Mongolian idiocy, or Mongolism. Even before the causes of Down syndrome were understood, there were...
So they basically got named... That's actually insane if you think about how crazy that is, bro. So they said, hey, these people look like a race of Asians. So we're going to name people with a disorder, and we're going to name them after a race of people in Asia. I don't know how Asians weren't outraged by this, bro. Like, that's just disrespectful. I don't know who... they might have... Yeah, wait, hold on. Who said it earlier? I forgot who said it earlier. But the person that gave them the name Mongoloids is insane, bro. That is crazy.
Attempts to eliminate the condition through eugenic means. Eugenics is the scientific theory that humans can be improved through selective breeding of populations. In the early 1900s, eugenics was not a fringe idea. It was not only taught at leading universities, but eugenic principles became enshrined into law. Indiana was the first American state to introduce the sterilization of people with Down syndrome, with eugenics being the justification. Plenty other states followed suit, with 33 of the 48 American states passing such laws. People with Down syndrome were included as acceptable targets of this practice. As eugenics took hold, some began to link Down syndrome and other intellectual disabilities with immorality as well as genetics. It was seen as not just a genetic defect, but as a moral contagion that could harm society as a whole.
Bro,
in 1927,
what is wrong with these people, yo? That's what I'm trying to say. I don't understand why, like, for the longest period of human history, the things that we would consider normal, like, just all of us, like, getting along and, like, all of us sharing the same spaces and not treating people who look different or who have different kinds of, genetic codings and all that kind of stuff. Like, why did it take so long for society to come together and realize, hey, this is fucking insane to do shit like this? You know what I mean? Like, I don't understand. Why were we so primitive, like, so recently? Like, the idea that this was a thing where it's like, yeah, people with Down syndrome, we're gonna fucking mutilate them and treat them like shit and do all these other projects and insane acts because they're different from us is just such an insane concept to think about. And it's like, I don't know how this was ever a thing that was normalized. You know what I mean? It's kind of crazy to think about.
The United States Supreme Court ruled in Buck v. Bell that the state could forcibly sterilize people with intellectual disabilities. As many as 60,000 people, with many of them being people with Down syndrome, were sterilized during the push for eugenics in the United States.
Lord Jesus.
But these laws would go on to inspire some of the worst examples of eugenics. The Nazi Party in Germany carried out the mass execution of tens of thousands of disabled people in a bid to improve the genetic stock. People with Down syndrome were framed as a drain on resources and a cost that the state could not bear. Under the Law for the Prevention of Hereditary Diseased Offspring, thousands were sterilized. But in 1939, Hitler authorized the Action T4. T4 was a secret program to murder those deemed life unworthy to live, and was euphemistically called involuntary euthanasia.
Hell, bro.
Children and adults with Down syndrome were among the first victims. Doctors selected children for death under the guise of medical care and moved them to specialized killing centers. Upon arrival, patients would be examined so that any pre-existing condition could be used as a false cause of death. Parents were told that their children had died of natural causes. Their bodies were then cremated and sent back to their parents. However, it would later be discovered that the ashes of those murdered were all mixed together, so when parents received the ashes, they received a mix of multiple victims.
Oh my God.
Under Action T4, people with Down syndrome were gassed, poisoned, or starved to death. This horrendous program of mass slaughter would prove to be the blueprint for the horrors of the Nazi death camps.
What the fuck's going on, bro? I never even knew any of this shit, bro. Oh my God, man. This is crazy, bro. I thought Down syndrome people were kind of just chilling. I'm not even trying to be funny, yo, but I thought they was literally just chilling, and I didn't know they were treated like this in history. This is crazy, bro. This is insane. I thought they was always kind of just minding their business, and they were just getting taken care of by people within their families. Like, this is actually genuinely insane, bro. Where we gotta cleanse them because they don't fit the genetic standard. Oh my God, bro. Hitler's crazy, yo. And we got goddamn Kanye and people like that saying he was doing the right thing. Ooh, Lord, wow.
Thankfully, after the Second World War,
my God,
eugenics as an ideology fell out of favor. But for many people with Down syndrome, the legacy of eugenics still caused much harm. Many people with Down syndrome were confined in institutions that were overcrowded, underfunded, and filled with abuse. One example is the Willowbrook State School in New York. The school was home to many children and young adults with Down syndrome, who were left to their own devices and without much in the way of any care. Often patients at this school were left covered in their own feces, naked and unattended to.
It's like every minute that goes by in this short mini documentary, it just gets worse. I don't even know what to say. I'm literally at a loss for words. I really don't know what to say.
It was only in the mid-20th century that techniques were discovered that allowed scientists to identify the shape and number of chromosomes in a cell. This led to the identification of the third chromosome and the adaptation of the term trisomy 21 to describe the condition. It wouldn't be until 1961 that an effort was made to remove the dehumanizing language of mongoloid, thanks in part to a better understanding of the causes of Down syndrome. The term mongoloid was seen as misleading and offensive, with the term becoming a pejorative. Leading scientists wrote a letter calling for the adoption of an alternative term for the condition, with Down syndrome being the one that stuck. In the 1980s and 90s, there was a change in the approach to the institutionalization of people with Down syndrome. Families refused to give up their children, and community care became the focus. A number of discriminatory practices were outlawed, such as charging people with Down syndrome more for airplane tickets. Rights were cemented, such as having the condition be a protected character.
Bro, y'all gonna charge people with Down syndrome on a higher ticket, but y'all not gonna make fat people pay more? I don't understand, bro. This is what I'm saying. I don't care if y'all want to call me controversial. You cannot choose to have Down syndrome, but you can choose to be obese, and you making them pay more? I don't understand, bro. I can't believe it. I just can't believe it. There are so many problems with this society, y'all. I cannot get over it. You will make a person with Down syndrome pay more on a flight, but a fat, obese motherfucker can get 2 seats because they can't fit in one, and they pay the regular price. Sometimes they don't got to pay anything at all because society feels bad for them. Oh my God, bro. I'm praying.
Characteristic to combat housing discrimination. As medical care improved, conditions such as congenital heart defects no longer proved to be a death sentence. Life expectancy for people with Down syndrome also increased. In the 1940s, life expectancy was just around 10 years old. whereas now it's around 60 years old.
That's what I'm
All
saying.
the
y'all.
while, people with Down syndrome became more visible, from actors with the condition starring in hit shows like Glee
Let's
or
get that
Line
number
of
up.
Duty, to the Special Olympics gaining popularity. Stereotypes continue to be challenged. Down syndrome advocacy groups seek to educate, provide support, and campaign for increased rights. But new challenges and controversies continue to affect people with the condition. With the advent of non-invasive prenatal testing, expecting parents can find out whether or not their baby might have Down syndrome. This has led to pregnancies being terminated where Down syndrome has been confirmed, with countries like Iceland having nearly 100% of pregnancies diagnosed with Down syndrome terminated. Some have
Jesus
termed
Christ.
this a new form of eugenics or even genocide, and some scientists like Richard Dawkins have stated that it would be immoral to bring a child with Down syndrome into the world. There are plenty of passionate examples of advocacy available online, including from people with Down syndrome concerned with such efforts. People with this condition have long been part of human history, though often marginalized or misunderstood. Whilst much has changed, there is still much to be done in the acceptance of people with Down syndrome.
Wow, bro. That was a very, very interesting documentary. I feel like no one has ever really talked about this, which is probably why it's gonna be super viral, bro. Cause like, that's just such an insane concept to think about. Like I said earlier, bro, I honestly didn't even think that Down syndrome had to deal with any form, or Down syndrome people had to deal with any form of injustice and criminal activities like that. Because I don't know, I was under the impression they was kind of just chilling. They born into this world, and then you know what I mean. They just kind of get taken care of by their family or whatever. I'm not really surprised to hear it though, because obviously we live in a world that's very disgusting. But that was insane. That was very, very insane to think about. I don't know, man. I'd be wondering sometimes too, because I would ask myself, like, I've even had those conversations too, where it's like, if I were to have a kid and the kid was diagnosed with Down syndrome, like, obviously before the kid's born or whatnot, and it's like, okay, the genetic coding or DNA, however they freaking do in the lab, right? And they say, yeah, your kid's gonna have Down syndrome. I would even ask myself, like, damn, like, would it make sense to keep the baby? Not even on some fuck shit, right? Because this is a real conversation. Because it's like, damn, I can keep the baby, and you know, I obviously let it have a life and do its thing and live out his days. But at the same time, is it not messed up, like they said earlier, to where it's like you're letting the baby be alive with like, I guess you could say, a somewhat crippling disorder, you know what I mean, where you'll never really get to live a full life? I don't know, that's like a moral dilemma. I mean, I would hope that I wouldn't have to deal with that circumstance, you know what I mean? Because then I feel like at that point I'm gonna just leave it to God and the woman. I got no choice in that regardless. So I don't know, y'all, but let me know what y'all think about that. I'm really at a loss for words. I don't know. That was a very interesting video, and it was very short too. But yeah, y'all know the deal. Like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what y'all would do in that situation. Let me know what y'all think about this Down syndrome documentary. I'm gonna see you on the next goddamn video. You feel me?
Shading my neck is so bright like a bee. Ballin' her lane, I feel like Kareem.